Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here's your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Sunday morning of Faith in Our Hometown. We're glad that you give us a part of your Sunday morning and spend it with us. We try to do our best always to try to engage you somehow and not waste your time, but by having a conversation with us and with some other folks from the community about things that matter to us, and especially that matter to us as people of faith. The last few weeks we've been talking a little bit about race relations and how to make the city a better place. And I hope that this conversation goes along with that, because my guest this morning, even though a little bit of a different angle on that same thing, is going to be Jeff Sims, who's the head football coach at Missouri Southern here in town. Our 3/4 of our football team are people of color, and Jeff gets to work with those young men day in and day out, and has been hearing about some of their fears and some of their dreams and some of the things that are going to happen now that they're coming to our community and trying to make our community and our university a better place by their presence. So stick with us. We're going to have the conversation right after this Mercy Minute, so don't go away.
The whole purpose of screening is to catch people who have a significant smoking history early enough where we can do something about it and potentially improve the duration of life. The minimum recommendation for screening is 30-pack years. So usually people who've smoked more than 30-pack years are the ones that we're screening. If we start screening yearly with low-dose CT scans, we can reduce the risk of death from lung cancer by 20 to 25%. Stage 1, 2, and 3 cancers potentially can be cured. When it becomes stage 4, the possibility of cure falls significantly.
Well, again, thanks for joining us again this morning at Faith in Our Hometown. My guest today, Jeff Sims. Jeff, we had you on probably about a year ago that we had you on the show. But tonight we're going to talk about a little bit weightier topic, and that is, what's going on. So many of our students who come to the university come here to play for us and to be part of this community and part of our university athletics program and all that kind of things. And it's supposed to be a partnership that's going to help them launch into the next chapter in their lives, okay? All the while providing some good entertainment and fun for us right here in our hometown, in our community. But there's a lot of educating that goes on. There's a lot of formation that goes on. There's all those things. And are they concerned? This is a new era. We've got COVID-19. We've got all the crazy stuff happening with racial relations in the world. What's going on, and how are you dealing with that with some of our football team?
Well, I appreciate you asking. And as you started the show, you started off talking about conversation. And I've been a coach for 26 years, and sports is so neat, and it's such a unique environment where so many people from different walks of life come together and become a part of a team and represent a university. And what I really love about being a part of a university is the diversity it brings together. People from all over, from different countries, different backgrounds. And now with what's been going on in the world, we've started some conversations. And having been in this for 26 years, I have friends that are my age that were athletes, and now they've went on in their lives, and and maybe they've made some money, and now their lifestyle has changed and things like that. So we've had conversations as 48-year-old men, and then you're dealing with 18 to 22-year-old young men who have one set of perspective. And what really is got me to want to get out and try to be a part of change and helping is, as I talked to the older men, and then I talked to the younger men, and I'm seeing some similarities of things that maybe I don't have to deal with. And so we talk about the conversations, but I think sometimes when people talk about a conversation, they think the conversation needs to be between black lives and white lives. But after we have those conversations, I think we have to have white conversations and black conversations so that we can understand and hear what each other are saying. Because a lot of times when it's black community talking to a white community, we all get defensive. And sometimes we got to let down those barriers and hear what they're saying, listen, then maybe even go back to our communities and say, are they right? Where are we failing? What can we do better? One thing that I've really experienced over this summer is it's the first year ever that students would come to our campus, and usually parents are really proud that their sons are going to college. But for the first time, I could see mothers who were fearful. They were nervous to let their sons go because they were afraid of what was going on in our society now.
Sure.
And then I have coaches of color on my staff, and those guys would come back to me later and go, yeah, coach, they pulled me aside and asked me, are we safe here?
Mm-hmm.
You know, in all that.
Biggest question in all orientation programs across the country, in every college in the United States and probably around the world, safety is the number one concern when parents are dropping off their kids.
Right. Are they safe?
Yeah.
And you said, don't we want our children to be safe? Don't we want them to know? And don't we want to be the community that, hey, you can come here. We're open. You know, we want to educate. We want to help. And we want to be a part of the change. And the reason it means so much to me is because athletics have created friendships, opportunities for education, and have changed my life. And we've used football and athletics as a vehicle to our education. And if we can use our university and our community, how much better off can we all be because of it?
Yeah. You know, it's, I mean, I see, you know, I have a different view on college athletics than a lot of people, and that's really one of the reasons why I'm glad we're a Division II school, because I think we can keep things in perspective a little bit better than some of the folks in those big old Division I schools that, you know, the sports have to drive everything, you know, or whatever. But I do think we've got a good community here, and I think the university is a good place to be, because I do think that for us, athletics really does provide that springboard for folks to have a better life in a community as adults. And I think it's easier for us to focus on that, on the education piece that athletics is a part of, rather than the athletics piece that education is a part of.
Well, and I hear exactly what you're saying. The thing about it is that we use athletics to get, it's the carrot that brings them. Mm-hmm. And we always say we use athletics to trick them into an education. You know, I have 3 college degrees, and my wife has 3 college degrees. But we were both first generation college students, and athletics is what brought me to the university. Even as a young man, if I wouldn't have had the opportunity to play football, I probably would have went in construction. And I thought at 18 years old, $20 an hour, man, what could I do with that? I didn't realize that that's $20 an hour and the toll it takes on your body, and then you have to do the job for 40 years. And my football coaches were able to use my passion to bring me to the university and help me find my education. And it totally changed my life, and it totally changed my family's lives. And that's what's unique about the situations we're going through now, is that we can open the door not only for people that are different than us, but also for us to get to know them. And I've been fortunate with sports to live all over the country. And what's really unique is that when you run into the strongest communities that are racist, or whatever words you want to say, they're not diverse. They've never experienced the other race. They haven't been around those people. So they live off a lot of stereotypes. But once you can get people together and we can see, you know, what you feel strong in your community about and what matters to you, it's amazing how we grow together. And at the end of the day, we're all kind of similar. But we are so scared sometimes that if we open ourselves to other people, we may lose what we have. And it's just really a blessing for me to be able to deal with these young men and their family of all backgrounds. You know, we have Polynesians, we have African Americans, we have white guys from the city, we have white guys from the country, and to use athletics to bring them to the community, and all of us experience different things, it really makes a team. Wouldn't it be cool if we could be a team like that as a university or as a community?
Oh, yeah.
And that's, it's just a shame. I kind of look at it this way. If I was driving down the road and there was a car accident, I would never stop to see what type of person's in that car. There's an accident, I would stop and I would help.
Right.
Well, right now, some of our community is saying, hey, we need some help. This isn't working. And if we can open our minds to it, I think we could do some really good things.
So tell me about some of these conversations that you're able to have, because I think that I think our audience would be interested in that part of things. I've long said that, of course, athletics is supposed to be the metaphor, a metaphor for life.
Yes, sir.
It's supposed to teach us a lot of lessons, as we move forward. But you talk about trying to get them to have some of those conversations, because it's there that we break down the walls, and it's there that we really become a team, a unity, even though we happen to come from all those vast different backgrounds. So what kind of conversations have you been having that it just made you proud to be part of the conversation process?
Well, to get to the proud part, you kind of got to start in the difficult part. and there's three hot button things that really segment everybody. First, there was the police brutality on George Floyd.
Okay.
And that fired everyone up. And I think everybody was behind that wasn't right, what happened. Right. But then there was rioting and looting. And then the narrative changed, and some people started pulling away and said, well, this happened, but this isn't the right way to do it. And I think that the black community kept trying to go back to, don't let this detract, these negative actions in rioting and looting, detract from the original issue. And sometimes we start moving to other issues and forget the core issue. And then the third issue is the flag, is that in athletics, that Colin Kaepernick took a knee, and he said, I'm taking a knee to bring attention to police brutality. But then we started turning it, if you kneel on the flag, it disrespects our military. But we weren't talking about the military. They were talking about police brutality. Now, I have two sons that are in the Army, and the reality is as somebody who's moved around a lot, it's really interesting in our country how we're from Joplin, or we're from Missouri, or we're from America. But we only pick the one that suits our argument at the time. To me, if we're gonna fight for the flag that we're Americans, then we need to care about people in St. Louis. We need to care about people in Minneapolis, because that's our country. And so that's where the difficulty comes. It starts a division amongst the group. So then we started having conversations. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just thinking what I'm going to do is we're going to take a quick break, a real quick break, and then we're going to be back to continue talking with Jeff Sims about those three issues, because I think you bring up three great things. So we'll be right back after a quick break.
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
Well, again, I'm here this morning with Jeff Sims, who is the head football coach at Missouri Southern. We're talking about formation of young men on a football team for life, getting an education here at Missouri Southern. And we talked about, you were setting this up in a very interesting way, because you really called three great issues out in terms of, it was what happened to George Floyd. It was some of the craziness that happened with some of the rioting and the looting that happened after that. And then we also had the Colin Kaepernick, issue in terms of respect for the flag and those kinds of things. So you were just getting ready to take a big deep breath and launch as to how you were going to do some of that before I had to cut you off for the break. So now I got you all teed up again. Go for it.
Well, the core issue was the police brutality. And then sometimes we start drifting away from that. And I think we all agree, we're all Americans. We don't condone stealing and looting, but where does that come from? Where does that frustration come from? And then we go back to the core issue, the police brutality. Well, I have 160 players, and as they started voicing their opinions, one of my coaches stood up and talked about Wednesday night, which was 2 nights later. He was out on a jog, and he happens to be a man of color. He's a college-educated man of color, and he was out working out. And he saw some police officers, and he felt like, man, I want to be different. I want to help, and I'm going to go over to these police officers, and I want to tell them, hey, I appreciate you guys protecting our community and do those things. And as he described it, he said, I put all my stuff down so I didn't have anything in my pockets. Then as I walked towards them, I raised my hands so they could see my hands. And they turned and noticed me, and their hands went right to their guns. And so he said, when that happened, he goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. I just wanted to come over. And he said, once I talked to them, they let up, I let up, and we had a great conversation. But as I was listening to him, I would never raise my hands as I walk towards the police. It's not something that I do.
Yeah.
I asked one of our players to stand up, a young man named Jaden Stoshak. I've coached him and his 2 brothers. And I asked him, Jaden, how many times has your mother had a conversation with you about how to deal with police in your life? And he goes, never. Well, he's a white young man. It's not something that we have to deal with. Then I asked his teammates, I said, how many guys here, parents, have discussed how you act, how you carry yourself around police officers? And all the African American young men stood up. And that's the thing is right now we talk about equality. We're better than we've been, but that doesn't mean we're good enough. That doesn't mean we're where we need to be. And when it comes back to the flag, is I think we are a great country. So we should have great expectations of ourselves. And we should literally have conversations. Are we doing what we can to make this place as great as it can be? And in a country where we can put a man on the moon, we can't arrest someone without killing them. It just doesn't make sense. And I think if we have conversations with each other, but then we go back home and we talk about it, like, how can we be better? And I just hope that we can all work to be better. Because I will tell you, there's nothing better than a team that working together towards doing positive, great things. Because everybody brings their own flavor to it, and it makes it so much fun. And in this conversation, I've talked to so many young men and older guys who have graduated and made good livings, but they still say to this day that every community they've ever been in, they've been pulled over. You had a guest on one of your shows who the state of Missouri says that 95% chance that you're going to be pulled over if you're a person of color over anybody else. And that's an issue. And so it doesn't mean that we're bad people. We're good people that need to find ways to make our community better and make people comfortable. And I think that's that makes Joplin such a great place, is that we are a good community.
We are.
So let's not defend how good we are. Let's just be good. Yeah. and rectify any issues that we see along the way.
Well, and I think that you're pointing out one of the really important things, and that is that we are good, and we can say that, and I think without apologizing, right. To say this is a great community. I love it,
right.
And in all the other smaller communities around us and everything, again, there's just great spirit and a lot of pride in this area, and we've got some great core values that are special to us. But are we as good as we can be yet? No, I never. If I gave up trying to improve myself,
absolutely,
at any point in time, I might as well crawl in the hole and drag the rock in over the top. I mean, I'm never going to be finished.
Right.
I'm always going to be in the process of getting better. and that's physically, I gotta keep my strength up now that I'm, 60, close to 60. If I'm not, I'm gonna lose muscle mass. I gotta do that. I gotta continue to make my brain work so that it doesn't get all stodgy on me. So I gotta, do things that are gonna exercise that part of me. I gotta do the same thing with my spirit. If I ever stop praying or doing the things that I need to do there, am I gonna do things? We gotta do this on all those levels. We've got to do it as a community too.
Sure.
How do we do that? And your job, of course, as a coach, is going to be how do you get your team to come together and to do those things. My job on this larger community level is to say, how do I get us to look at some of those issues? And that's why we do this show. Right. Is let's look at some of these issues. Let's continue to improve ourselves. Let's continue to push ourselves, propel ourselves forward in a way that's going to make us better.
Absolutely, and that's. When you read the Bible, that's what we're aspiring to be, what God made us to be, and He died for our sins, and we have to accept that we are at fault at times, not purpose. I think where we struggle sometimes is, I think where we are in our community today, that many people, we're not overtly causing acts to hold people down, but we do need to look at our system. We need to look at when we make mistakes, and right now in America, 1 in 4 African American men are arrested and going to jail. 1 in 17 white men are going to jail. Here's the deal: we have 2.7 million people in jail. In 1970, we had 375,000. We need to figure out how to not have 2.7 million people in prison.
I agree with you.
We have to be better. We need to. I would tell you this: I've been fortunate to live all over the country. This really is an awesome place to live. So let's keep working to make it awesome. Let's be the example for everybody else, and have those tough conversations, so that we can continue to have a great community. Because if we don't, one day we'll look around and we won't be what we should be.
So Jeff, let me ask you a couple practical things then,
yes,
about
sir.
how do we get that conversation going, like even in our backyards,
right.
rather than, because you've got a little bit of a captive audience.
Yep.
How do you get the different pieces of that team to let down their defenses enough to be able to have the real conversation? How do you get at some of that?
Well, I believe we take negatives and turn them into positives. Right now, it's all over the news, so I think that's like, it's right in our face. So we need to say to ourselves, what can I do? How can I be a part of change? And the last couple of weeks on your show, you've had different avenues and opportunities, and I think everybody just needs to sincerely find their path and what their best way is. And where they fit in. For us, we're going to try to do 2 things in our program. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to educate, and I mean that sincerely. In my profession, we go recruit athletes, and because of that, I've visited many high schools. It's amazing the disparity in the educational system. There's no reason, even in poor communities, we should have awesome education systems. If we can put people on the moon, we can have great high schools in every community. We need to give teachers the resources they need, because if we can educate our community, I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity to have doctors and lawyers and give people the opportunity to be part of the infrastructure, so that we can be more diverse. The second thing that I personally think that we need to change, and we're going to try to do a great job of that, is we need young people to understand they're more than athletes. All right, we use athletics to trick them into an education, but it's been a long time since I've caught a pass. My coaches were a blessing to me to help me bridge that gap from 18 to 22. And in that process, we need to help our young people understand they're more than athletes. And if people in the community wanted to help with the football program, with athletics, with the university, I think that would be valuable, because when you're 18 to 22, I still think you're searching and you're trying to figure out who you want to be, and you have all this energy and talent, but you're not sure where to direct it at. And so for our sake, we're going to try to be the best education we can and help people understand that they're way more than just the athletic ability. We're going to use that athletic ability to take our next step in life.
Well, I think all of your students and all of our students at Southern in general all need to remember that they're bigger than the sum of the parts, but that each one of them is a unique human being on this journey through life, and we're just trying to help them get there to make the next step. My guest this morning, Jeff Sims, who's the head football coach at Missouri Southern. Jeff, thanks for being with us again this morning. It's kind of fun to talk to you about something on a bigger scale than just football, okay? And we're going to be right back after this Mercy Minute, so don't go away.
The whole purpose of screening is to catch people who have a significant smoking history early enough where we can do something about it and potentially improve the duration of life. The minimum recommendation for screening is 30-pack years. So usually people who've smoked more than 30-pack years are the ones that we're screening. If we start screening yearly with low-dose CT scans, we can reduce the risk of death from lung cancer by 20 to 25%. Stage 1, 2, and 3 cancers potentially can be cured. When it becomes stage 4, the possibility of cure falls significantly.
Well, again, I'm always honored that you join us for a part of your Sunday morning, either you very early birds or the replay at 9. But my guest this morning, Jeff Sims, who's the head football coach out at Missouri Southern, brought about a few things I think that are good for us to think about. And then number one is that everybody is trying to grow through whatever point in life they are, and especially our young adults, are trying to grow themselves up into whatever they're supposed to be for the rest of their lives. And some of us are lucky enough to be involved in that process along the way. But if we can help them to have the conversations that get them to break through all of the heavy individualism in our society, which in some ways is good for us, but in some ways holds us back, if we can get them to break through all that and figure out how to be a team and how to work together for the betterment of the whole, we're going to be raising up some great team players. We're going to be raising up some great citizens. We're going to be raising up some great people that are going to lead us into the future together, because all of us need to remember that we're part of a bigger team. And that was the lesson that I learned this morning. So come back and join us again next week for Faith in Our Hometown. Have a great Sunday.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.